All right, give it a couple minutes for people to trickle in. What's big on the Utah news, Sterling?
Well, today Vivint actually got bought. Vivint Smart Homes. That's a $5.2 billion deal. That's news as of this morning. We also are at like 238% of snow year to date, so we're way ahead of where we're supposed to be. So for all the skiers and snowboarders, that's good news.
Of that, all the mountains already open.
Yeah, everything's open. Everything's rocking.
What's your mountain of choice?
You know, I'm normally a Park City guy. Park City Mountains kind of probably my favorite, but Deer Valley, Alta, great too. What about you? You come out here, Barry?
Yeah, my friend has a spot right at the bottom of the orange bubble on the canyon side.
Yep.
So I spent a lot of time there, and then I went to Alta and Snowbird. Yeah, place is awesome.
Yeah, it is. It's great.
I think you got a future in Utah politics.
I don't know about that, but hopefully in Utah business at least.
All right, sounds good. I'm gonna hop into intros. I see people are trickling in here. We'll get going in another minute. I'd encourage people. We intentionally leave this pretty open-ended for some chat. So in the public chat, feel free to post some questions or some thoughts, and I'll make sure that we're getting a couple of them answered. To kick things off, my name's Todd Bustler. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Champify. I'm really excited to have Sterling Snow here. I've gotten to know him a little bit over the last year or so. Sterling, I've been reading and consuming your stuff on LinkedIn for years and SaaStr talks, and really admire what you've built from a culture and outcome standpoint at Divvy. For people that don't know, Sterling is the CRO of Divvy. They were acquired recently by Bill.com for $2.4, $2.5 billion after like only a 5-year run. So congrats on the hell of a run you've had there, and thanks for joining.
No, I appreciate it. No, it's fun. I'm excited to chat.
Awesome. Let's hop into it. So, you know, in reading a lot of your content and watching your SaaStr talk, one of the biggest things that I've seen is you've been really creative, in impactful in how you drive alignment at Divvy and at other organizations I'm sure you're involved with. What are some of the experiences and results that drove you toward these novel approaches?
Yeah, interesting question. So the truth is what drove them was a lot of negative experiences. Like if you go back to the company I was at before Divvy, it was a company called Jive. And we were so misaligned with marketing, between marketing and sales. We were so broken that we couldn't agree on any of the data. We couldn't agree on any of like what was good work. So to give you an example, like we literally had a PPL strategy. We were, buying leads off different things. We were getting a lot of like 14-year-olds who were signing up for it because they got a month of free Netflix. We were so incredibly misaligned on what the outcomes were that we were driving towards. And it was a lot of just negative experiences like that really drove like, okay, there has to be a better way to create alignment. We have to figure it out, or we will not grow the way that we want to grow. So really, it was just how awful and broken the siloed approach was that drove a lot of the creativity around alignment at the end of the day.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. I've had some of the same experience in my run at Heath, but I remember the first time seeing like, okay, we're going to move from MQLs and get marketers focused on pipeline. And this kind of revelation happened. I think a lot of people are catching on to that. What are some of the different ways you've seen companies create the culture of one team? Because I think in theory, you can get some of the metrics going, but how do you build that culture? Is it mostly metrics driven? Is it comp? Is it anything else that you've done to kind of foster that?
To me, the bedrock of all culture is, what is the mountain we are trying to climb together? What is the North Star? And again, it's ridiculously simple, but if you hopped in and randomly asked people across 100 different companies, like, hey, you know what's the one thing that matters the most at your business, you'd get a lot of different answers. And what's worked for us is when we were the best at clearly identifying our North Star, it aligned everybody. Everybody owns a slightly different part of that relay race, right? Like there's a baton pass that's going on. But if you have that North Star, your culture is a lot better and you always get to reorient yourself back to it. And so for me, that's really, it's a simple answer, but it's very hard, especially because you end up having a lot of competing priorities and different things that need to get done. But if everybody knows the North Star and everybody can rally around it, you're going to be in a good spot culturally.
How do you communicate that? Right? You have a bunch of new hires coming. You're doing it in the interview process to make sure you're testing for the right things. But how often are you communicating that? Because I think one of the key things is, you know, on your end, you feel like you're beating the same drum and repeating yourself, but that is important. So how do you think about this?
So again, we live in a time where it's sophisticated to have gobs and gobs of data and dashboards and different things, and they all have their place. But we literally had one thing on all of our TVs across our building. We started every company meeting with one thing, and it was our North Star. And for us, it was usage, and that's how we were orienting. But you have to talk about it every single time. And then I actually went as far as on the revenue teams, anytime anybody had a meeting, you would say like your name and your part of that number that you owned. And so it just becomes very, very cultural. You can feel like it's repetitive, but that's fine. People need to keep understanding what's going on. I'm a big Doc Rivers fan. And one thing that he did when he was on the Clippers is he fixed a spotlight to shine into the rafters where a championship banner should hang. And so every day when they would come into practice, they would see this light shining on the spot, and it was orienting them to their North Star, which was to win a championship. I think as businesses, we have to do the exact same thing. So use your company meetings, use your dashboards, use, like, if you send out a weekly Slack or email update, reiterate it and make sure that it's a something that's facing your company 100% of the time.
Makes sense. How, if taking that a step more tactically, right? So you align people on that key metric, keep it very simple, make sure you're constantly repeating it, shine the spotlight in whatever, way you can do that as a company. If you were moving into a new role as a CRO at a growth stage company, anything more tactically from like a comp plan perspective or planning cadence or process that you think people could take away and start doing as they go into 2023?
Yeah. So like once you have that North Star, then you get into, well, which parts of that journey do different people own? And the thing that I always talk about that I think people get wrong quite a bit is you need to not only measure your step of the funnel, but you need to measure one step deeper in the funnel. So for marketing, for example, let's say that pipeline is like that primary thing that you're gonna, but we do quotas in marketing that you're gonna quota, bonus, promote off of. Well, you also need to go one step deeper and say, well, what converts, right? And for sales, it's not just what new business did you close, it's also what was their revenue in the first 90 days, like some way to measure one step deeper in the funnel. And the counter argument to that is always like, well, you never want to build comp plans around things that you don't control. I'm like, you're going to tell me that the sales rep closing that deal doesn't have some control over how well they're going to implement? Like it's a cop out, right? And so I think that tactically go each step in your funnel, decide who owns it, how you're going to measure it, And then as you're building comp plans, make sure you're not just comping off the thing that they directly own, but also the thing that happens right after that, because that will make magic in terms of your handoffs and in terms of your alignment.
I spend time at Square, which has a lot of similarities to Divvy, right? And it's very clear, like what's the usage or the consumption or the number that they're processing. For the run-of-the-mill SaaS company that is like standard seat-based, what does that look like for the AE perspective?
For the AE themselves, I mean, you pick it, right? It can be like total revenue, it can be ARPU, it can be, number of seats, it can be units based. And that's on the leadership to decide, hey, which North Star can we pick that's very simple, very relatable, that translates into everything else we want as a business, users, whatever. And so I think it varies business to business, but I think the principles are the exact same independent.
Yeah. Yeah, takeaway is whatever that thing is one step further, that AE or that whatever in the part of the acquisition funnel should be thinking about it, even though if they can't directly control it per se.
Yeah,
I think
exactly. For marketing, right? Like marketing needs to feel that same way. Sure, they might not close it, but they better care about if it closes. Otherwise, you end up with a bunch of wasted pipeline that does nobody any good, and bam, like you're misaligned. So yeah, always measure your step, but also one step deeper.
I think underpinning everything that enables you to do this is, really good rev ops, really good, cross-functional teams. As we see this trend of rev ops, first off, becoming more important, right, and getting like a bigger seat at the table. They're acting as the glue between sales ops, marketing ops, success, growth teams, PLG strategy, et cetera. Why do you think that trend's happening now?
It's happening because people are so sick of spending half of their time making these different data sources tie out. And it's like marketing ops goes to war with sales ops and they each like report to their, respective generals. It's a waste of time. It's asinine. And I will say that I didn't fully understand how important rev ops was going to be when we started at Divvy, 5 years ago. But man, is that so important, because you're right. It's the glue. It ties everything together. It makes sure that you're operating off of one comprehensive data set and not having to like bicker about every single little thing. You're still going to have varying points about what different data means and what it's telling you, but you can eliminate a good chunk of kind of wasted time and energy by having that ops resource be centralized across the entire acquisition funnel.
Yeah, I love that. And you're not in these meetings of fighting over credit. You're actually looking at the same data and not worried and wasting the time, as you mentioned. So Sterling, I think with your background, you come in, you've proven this as a CRO. Put yourself maybe 4 or 5 years back where you didn't have that run under your belt, where you could instantly get that credibility and ability to rally everyone on the same page. How do you get all those stakeholders on board for a change like this? Like the marketing to own some of the revenue, or sales to own part of what would be CSM function. How do you start to shift those mindsets if you haven't had the run you've had?
Yeah, I do. So here's a couple things. I think very much it starts with the executive buy-in, right? So, and how do you get executive buy-in? So let's just take like a founder CEO, for example. What do they really care about? Okay, well, they care about growth and they care about profitability and they care about efficiency, whatever it is. You have to go and basically sign up for what they want to see. That's how you get the buy-in. You say, hey, if you trust me with X, I'm going to promise you Y. And, if I don't get you Y, then, it's my head that's on the line, right? And so I think that was a process that I went through at Divvy. It's like, okay, you want those types of acquisition numbers. I'm telling you, the only way I can get them for you is if we align this funnel. And if I get to, pull those different levers and get the teams to do what we need them to do. And so you're making a trade. And what the trade is you get more responsibility, you get more authority, but you're also getting more responsibility. And that's how it works. It's the same way with budget. It's like, well, do you want more budget? It's like, okay, well, tell me what you're willing to sign up for to get that budget. That it's just you're horse trading, right?
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how like how those goals are set. Like I know in some organizations it's a CRO. I'm reading the CMO of Sixth Sense book right now. She talks about the CMO becoming the chief market officer and them owning a lot of it. How did it work in the situation of Divvy, or if it's not what you think is ideal, how should that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is one where I think it depends a lot on the personalities around the table. For us, what we would do is it really was like pretty much the entire executive team. We would get together and we'd say like, hey, what is it that we want to do? Like think about the year. What do we want to do this year? And then we would all respectively work backwards and say, well, what would I need to go make that true? Understanding our historical data, understanding the areas where we don't have any data, but we're going to make some assumptions. And then we'd come back and we'd say, well, this is what it looks like. And it'd be like, well, you can't have all that because, you know, we don't have everything. And you would just go through that process. But really, you're trying to create an environment where everybody's bought in, everybody's planned and resourced appropriately to hit whatever target it is you set. But I believe at the end of the day that is the work of a great FP&A team and a good revenue team, like a good rev ops team with buy-in and commentary from lots of other folks. But to me, that's where it lives, and that's who like reports back on it and makes tweaks to it as you go along.
Who's in that initial room having those conversations where you're getting alignment, doing some of the internal kind of collaboration and almost negotiating, but who's in that room, and then how do you cascade that down across the organization?
For us, it was always finance and revenue, right? If you were to look at where I think a good CRO spends a lot of their time, you're spending a lot of it with finance, like a lot of it with finance for a bunch of reasons. We're talking about target setting right now, but it's also the resources to go and hit those targets. It's also the fast iterations for if things are working, double down. If things aren't working, go a different direction. And so anyway, I think it's finance, and then you start to cascade that down, right? Like once you're aligned, it's like, okay, how do we make sure that product is leading from the front so that we can do this in a sustainable way, and we're shipping experiences that people love, stuff like that. But to me, it always starts with a strong finance partnership.
Yep. Love that, making finance your best friend there.
Yep.
Right now I'm talking to sales leaders, marketing leaders every single day, and a lot of people are feeling that building pipelines a little harder, deals are taking a little bit longer. How does that influence some of the goal making right now? How are you thinking about it, or how you would advise other similar companies?
All right, so here's what I actually think. I actually think
Give us the real thoughts here, Sterling.
It doesn't really change anything. Did it get harder? Yes. Does it change anything? Not really. And so to me, well, what do you have to protect? You have to protect your culture, because if you feel like you're just losing over and over and over again, A, it's contagious. B, it's extremely demoralizing. So I would rather figure out, how do we still win? What does that formula still look like? And I realize it's going to look a little different than it did in the past, but instead of like revising down a target, I want to figure out how to get ahead. Because that's the thing that's interesting to me about downturns is when everything is up and to the right, everyone's pretty much up and to the right. It's really hard to get separation. But when you're trying to sprint up a hill, that's when you can put some distance between you and anybody else in your space. And so I would rather figure out that, as opposed to like, saying, hey, we're gonna kind of soften these because deals are taking longer, or deal size is down, or lead flows down, like whatever the case is. And so but I also I firmly believe this is a momentum game and this is a culture game. And if you lose that locker room, good luck. And so you have to be very careful with how you go about it, because you still have to figure out ways to win and to generate momentum.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like a lot of people are almost using that negative talk as okay, we can slow down. And
Yes.
Basically you're saying is hey, that's dangerous and negatively contagious. how do we still build the momentum? When I hear you say that, what I take away if I'm a sales leader is, okay, there's certain pockets of your ICP or verticals or segments that, maybe you're not feeling it as much, and that's where we're going to double down and try to make up for some other areas. Is that right? Or is there another
It's a
way you think
great
about it?
example. It's a great example. To me too, it's like, hey, this is a math problem and a puzzle that we all get to solve. Like maybe you have to actually be a little bit more aggressive on like what it costs to generate pipeline, and you're going to have to take that expense from somewhere else. Like the puzzle can look different, but I still want to figure out how to win, instead of like waving the white flag, because I think the second you do that, it's just dangerous. And you kind of start your way down, that it might feel nice for a minute, like some pressure is relieved, but what you realize is that like not getting that job done has disastrous consequences at some point down the line. And I watch teams, like the second you give them an excuse, they're like, ooh, macro's hard. So, it's not me, it's macro. You just watch how people kind of like internally sort of give up that fight. And I'd rather say, hey, tell me what you need and let's go figure out how to win, as opposed to just figuring out how to have a nice excuse that makes us all feel better.
Yeah, have fun losing, figure out what are the things I need to change from a pricing standpoint, from a more
Yep.
resources, services, et cetera. Yeah, I love that.
Like maybe
One thing
margins have to come down. Maybe you're talking to finance about like, and these are challenging things. But I think that's the discussion I'd rather have, as opposed to the like, oh, it got harder. Should we make it a little more realistic?
Yeah. One thing I love that. I think the challenge is you need to still hit this. Tell me what you need. Like we can get creative on the margins. We can figure out what concessions we might need to make. Like we can make changes to enable you. One
Mm-hmm.
thing I'm hearing a lot of sales leaders think about is kind of reallocating quota in different areas, specifically taking some of the really good sellers that might have been new logo focused more on kind of defense and upsell, or investing heavier on the partnerships and alliance side. I think to the latter part, on the partnership and alliance side, have you seen that become a bigger part of the business, or do you see that as a trend that is maybe becoming more important right now?
It's a really good question. I think it's probably somewhat dependent on the different types of businesses that are out there. But I don't know that's any bigger or smaller than it's always been. Channel and distribution is always important. It is a more efficient channel, so maybe like in leaner times you tend to like focus more on it, because the hot and heavy performance marketing to direct sales is taking a bit of a back seat. But I think that's always important, and maybe it just gets a little bit more love in leaner times.
Is there specific metrics that you look at there? Like I know there's always source or influence or number of integrations. Is there anything that you really look at or think about to think about the success of partnerships and alliances?
I honestly think it's the same stuff that you're looking at and measuring with any other part of the business. Like, well, hey, like what's our CAC? What's our deal size? What's the velocity? How many of these are we doing? What percent of total revenue? I think it's the same thing. It's just a part of your channel mix. It's just a different part, but it should be looked at holistically and reinvested in, or investment pulled back depending on performance, just like you would in any other area of your revenue funnel.
So everything you're saying to me makes a ton of sense, but there's a lot of CEOs that have done this before that don't, think about it the same way you do. If you're a new sales leader or a new marketing leader, even RevOps, that's going into an organization that might not think about it as forward looking as you are, what advice or best practices do you have to get some of that buy-in from leadership? Like obviously it matters a ton, right? But like how do you actually go and make that happen?
It shouldn't work this way. It really shouldn't. But one of the most effective ways is go and get somebody who does have that experience and like let them validate the thought process. And then you can bring that back internally. It shouldn't matter. It should be like, hey, we're just paying attention to who says things and what seems like the best direction. But the truth is, if Mark Zuckerberg walked in and said something, he has 1000x the authority that I do. And so, you might not get Zuck, but you can go get somebody who has really relevant, really impressive experience, validate with them, and then kind of bring that back to the group. And for people who are doing it for the first time, that's very comforting, because everything's brand new to them and they don't know if you're driving off a cliff or if you're being very smart. And so using some of those external data points to validate's always been helpful in my experience. Because I've never been the oldest person in the room, the most experienced person in the room. So when I needed help, I'd go get it.
That was my experience at Heap too. Like I was definitely not the oldest person, not the most experienced. And then when an advisor that has seen it 2 or 3 times validates what I think we should do, all of a sudden it happens. Did you have any peers there or specific advisors that were helping you build this culture when you were in the early innings of Divvy?
Yeah, totally. I went out and found people who were going to help me be better, that were outside of the organization, that would have fresh eyes, different experiences, all of those kinds of things. And they were incredibly helpful to me, like throughout the journey, for sure.
Final parting words of wisdom, putting yourself in a new first-time CRO, first-time VP of sales shoes, right? I think some of the big takeaways I heard today are: think one step further in the funnel, right? And comp and organize people on that. Align on the North Star metric. Build some key relationships with RevOps. It's going to be your best friend, and finance. Anything else?
Yeah, mostly from not being great at it, but I think a lot about over communication with everybody. So when you have a goal for the year, you want to get to $100 million, over communicate, not just on the goal, but also on the plan. Like people will buy in, and they will pick up a shovel and help you dig. But the more information that you can expose, the better. So over communicate. The same thing with like your finance partners. So let's say that you set up a cadence. Over communicate, like, are things going well? Are things going poorly? Don't ever surprise anybody with good or bad news. Like, just keep people close, keep people in the loop. And here's the other thing that I've noticed in some of our harder times: shorten the cycle. Like, relentlessly shorten the cycle. If you
The
were on a
communication cycle?
No, the cycle for everything. So let's say that you're on a monthly quota, you're on a quarterly quota, go to monthly. If you're on annual, go to quarterly. Shorten the cycle, because it forces you to have an increased level of discipline and to iterate faster. Do the same thing with like your shipping cadences or anything that you're working on, but just shorten those cycles, because you're going to need every minute you have, because things are harder.
Love that. Sterling, last question, 30-second response. What is a lot of people are doing 2023 planning forward looking. What's your reflection process look like? Hey, how did we do in 2022? Where were we off on our assumptions? How do you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, you did one of them. It's like, okay, what did materially different than we thought it was going to do last year? And being as smart as we can without trying to predict the future, what do we think behavior is going to look like going forward? And then what can we do to create a margin of safety? That's the other thing I always think about, is what are either the assumptions or the budget, or wherever it is in that plan that can start to provide you with a margin of safety against those goals. Hopefully that leads to overperformance, but worst case, it can kind of provide some buffer for your initial targets.
Sterling, this was awesome. We're at time. I really appreciate you taking the time. Congrats on everything you've done and building up the Utah tech community. For folks that are on, we'll record this and send a summary. Please email me with any other ideas for future content or webinars. Sterling, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it.
All right, take care, everyone.